The wind screamed across the frozen village, rattling shutters and sending loose snows swirling in ghostly patterns. Icicles hung like jagged crystal daggers from the rooftops. Shimmering in the faint glow of the late afternoon sun, the world seemed silent beneath the thick blanket of snow, save for the occasional crunch of her boots against the icy path. Mara tightened her scarf around her neck, and clutched the small basket of groceries closer to her chest. She had spent the day tending to her garden, braving the frost to collect what little produce had survived the harsh winter. Now, as she walked the narrow lane toward her cabin on the edge of the forest, her mind wandered to the warmth of her small fire and the soft blankets waiting for her. That's when she saw it. At first, she thought it was a fallen pile of snow or a stray bundle of cloth, but then a subtle movement caught her eye. A small figure shivered near the tree line, hunched and almost invisible against the icy landscape. Mara froze, her breath catching in her throat. She took a cautious step closer, her boots sinking slightly into the snow. It was a bear, a young one no bigger than a large dog, its fur frosted and matted, eyes barely open. Its tiny body shivered violently, each tremor a stark reminder of how dangerously cold it must be. Mara's heart lurched. She knew the forest was home to many creatures, but she had never seen a bear so small and so helpless. Left out in the unforgiving winter, fear prickled along her spine. Bears were wild animals, unpredictable, potentially dangerous. Yet, as she looked into the bear's tired, frightened eyes, something deep inside her shifted. Compassion surged stronger than caution. How could she leave it here, likely to succumb to the icy wind? The thought of returning to her warm cabin, without helping it, felt unbearable. She knelt a few steps away, careful not to startle it. "Hey, it's okay," she whispered, her voice soft and steady. The bear's ears twitched, and it gave a tiny whimper, as if understanding her words in its own way. Mara glanced around, ensuring no one else was nearby, then removed her wool gloves and slowly approached, placing her hands on the snow-covered ground to avoid sudden movements. The bear trembled violently. But it didn't run. Mara's instincts told her to act fast. The frostbite was severe. If she delayed, the little creature might not survive until morning. She remembered the thick wool blanket she had in her basket. She could wrap it carefully around the bear to preserve its warmth. She inched closer, speaking in gentle tones, her breath fogging in the icy air. Every step was a risk. One wrong movement could provoke the bear. Mara's mind raced through stories she'd heard of people being attacked by frightened animals. But she couldn't ignore the helplessness before her. Compassion, courage, and fear tangled within her chest like the twisting branches of the nearby forest. Finally, she crouched low, slowly extending her gloved hands. The bear's eyes met hers, wide and trusting in a way that made her chest tighten. "Come on, we'll get you somewhere warm," she murmured. Inch by inch, she reached forward, careful and deliberate. The little bear allowed her to slide the blanket under it, wrapping it around its tiny, frozen body. Its small muzzle pressed against the fabric as if seeking safety, and Mara felt an unexpected wave of relief. The wind howled louder, and Mara glanced back toward her cabin. The path was slippery, and the snow was deep, but she could not leave the bear here. With steady hands, she scooped up the trembling animal, cradling it against her chest. Its warmth, or the faint heat it had left, seeped into her coat, a fragile life she now carried with both awe and fear. Step by careful step, Mara made her way toward home, the forest looming like a dark guardian beside her. She whispered softly to the bear, promising safety, warmth, and food, though she herself wasn't sure what awaited them inside. One thing she knew. She could not abandon this tiny, frostbitten soul to the merciless cold. Tonight, her courage would be tested, and perhaps, her life changed forever. The door to Mara's cabin creaked as she pushed it open, her boots sending tiny clouds of snow into the warm air. Inside, the fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across the wooden walls. The scent of pine smoke and dried herbs mingled, a comforting contrast to the biting cold outside. She stepped inside carefully, cradling the tiny bear in her arms, its body shivering violently despite the blanket she had wrapped it in. For a moment, she hesitated. Her cozy cabin was her sanctuary, a place of safety, quiet, and order. Now this wild creature, a bear with claws sharp enough to tear through flesh, was in her home. Her pulse raced with a mixture of fear and responsibility. She knew wild animals could be unpredictable, even young ones. But looking into its frost-glazed eyes, she felt something she couldn't ignore: trust. Fragile but real. "Shets, it's okay," she murmured, setting the bay gently on the thick rug in front of the fire. It trembled, pressing its tiny paws against the woven fabric. Mara pulled her chair closer and watched. Every muscle in her body tensed with alertness. She grabbed a small bowl from the kitchen and filled it with warm water, dipping a piece of bread to soften it. Slowly, she offered it to the bear, keeping her movements deliberate and calm. The bear sniffed, hesitant at first, then took a small nibble. Mara exhaled quietly, relief flooding through her chest. She realized she had underestimated the intensity of the bond forming already. A delicate thread of trust that could shatter with one sudden move. She settled on the floor, cross-legged, keeping her eyes level with the bear, speaking softly to calm it further. Hours passed like this. Mara kept the fire alive, wrapped extra blankets around the bear, and whispered gentle reassurances as it gradually began to stop trembling. Every now and then, it would raise its head, sniffing the air, eyes wide and wary, but never aggressive. Mara marveled at its resilience. The tiny creature had endured freezing winds and near death, yet now here, it began to feel safe. But the fear lingered. She thought of all the stories she had heard about people being attacked by wild animals they tried to save. She knew that if the bear panicked or felt threatened, her cozy cabin could turn into a dangerous trap. Still, she couldn't turn it away. Compassion overrode caution, and the tiny life she now held in her hands demanded she act, even at personal risk. Night fell, blanketing the world in darkness. The cabin's fire burned low, casting a warm glow over Mara, and the little bear curled in the thickest blanket she could find. She kept a watchful eye, listening to its shallow breaths, adjusting its position whenever it shivered too violently. For the first time, she allowed herself a quiet smile. Against all odds, she was saving it. As the hours ticked by, Mara began talking to the bear, not just to calm it, but because she felt a strange need to connect. "You'll be safe here," she whispered. "I'll make sure you eat, you sleep, and you're warm. Nobody else can help you like I can." The bear tilted its head, almost as if understanding, and pressed itself closer into the blanket. Mara felt a surge of hope mixed with awe. This small, wild creature was beginning to trust her, and in that trust, a profound bond was forming. By the time the first light of dawn crept through the frost-covered window, the bear was calmer, its breathing steady. Mara, exhausted but filled with a quiet triumph, leaned back against the wall. She had taken a tremendous risk, inviting a wild animal into her home, but it had worked. She realized that sometimes, the greatest acts of courage were the ones that sprung from the heart rather than the head. And so, with the fire still warm, and the bear slowly regaining strength, Mara prepared for what the coming days would demand: patience, vigilance, and perhaps, the beginning of a friendship that neither of them could have expected. Outside, the snow continued to fall, oblivious to the miracle taking place inside her small cabin. Days passed, and the harsh winter outside remained unrelenting, but inside Mara's cabin, a quiet miracle unfolded. The little bear, once frozen and shivering, had begun to transform before her eyes. Its tiny body, now covered in fur gradually thawed from frost, was stronger and more confident. No longer just a frightened, fragile creature, it began to explore its new surroundings cautiously, sniffing at the furniture, tapping its paws on the wooden floor, and even batting gently at the hanging herbs above the hearth. Mara watched every movement with rapt attention, her heart swelling with a mixture of relief and awe. She had never imagined that saving a life could feel so delicate, so fragile, and yet so profoundly rewarding. Each day she spent with the bear, she noticed subtle changes. A tilt of its head, a tentative nuzzle against her hand, or the soft, trusting whine it made when she approached. It was learning that she was not a threat, and she was learning in return that a wild heart could indeed learn to trust. Meals became rituals of patience and care. Mara would sit on the floor with a bowl of softened bread, warmed milk, or berries. And the bear would creep closer, testing the boundaries of its newfound safety. Sometimes it would step back suddenly, startled by a shadow or the crackle of the fire, but Mara's calm voice always coaxed it forward again. "It's okay," she whispered endlessly. "You're safe here. Nothing will hurt you." Slowly, the bear began to eat from her hands, the small, cautious bites a testament to the trust forming between them. In the quiet moments, Mara found herself talking to it as if it were a child, sharing stories of her childhood, tales of the village, and even her private hopes and fears. It was absurd, she thought, to converse with a wild animal. But somehow, the bear's steady gaze and gentle movements made her feel heard, understood, and less alone in the vast isolation of the snowy forest. When she laughed, the bear would tilt its head, almost as if joining in, and Mara would smile, her heart lightened by the small, silent companionship blossoming in her cabin. One evening, the storm outside was particularly fierce. The wind howling and snowdrifts piling high against the windows. Mara sat on the floor beside the fire, the bear curled into her lap, a tiny warmth radiating against her cold hands. She stroked its soft fur, feeling a connection she could not put into words. It had been barely a week, yet she felt as though she had known this creature forever. Its trust was absolute, and she, in turn, felt a bond deeper than she had ever known with any human. Yet, beneath the joy and wonder, a quiet tension lingered in her mind. She knew the bear was wild. Eventually, it would need to return to the forest, to the life it had been born to live. But those thoughts were pushed aside as she watched it paw at a piece of string dangling from a shelf, tumble onto the rug with a soft thud, and then gaze up at her with those dark, expressive eyes. It was innocent, curious, playful, and entirely dependent on her now. Could she bear to let it go? Mara's days took on a rhythm tending to the bear, keeping it warm, feeding it, and speaking softly. Nights were spent by the fire, the bear nestling close, occasionally stretching out to curl against her side. She began to anticipate its movements, to understand its subtle signals of hunger, fear, or contentment. Each interaction strengthened their bond, a fragile yet unbreakable bridge between the human and the wild. By the end of the week, the bear would follow Mara from room to room, sometimes nuzzling against her leg, other times standing on its hind legs to peer curiously at what she was doing. Mara laughed softly at its antics, her heart swelling with affection. She had never imagined that rescuing a life could create a connection so profound, a companionship so pure, that it could fill the coldest corners of her soul with warmth. And as she sat by the fire, the snowstorm raging outside, Mara realized something extraordinary. The bear had not only survived, but it had thrived, and in doing so, it had given her something she had longed for without knowing it. A reminder that trust, patience, and compassion could create a bond stronger than fear, stronger than isolation, and stronger than winter itself. The morning sun glinted off the thick layer of snow outside Mara's cabin, painting the world in sparkling white. The wind had softened to a gentle whisper, and the air smelled faintly of pine and frost. Inside, Mara stirred from a restless sleep, her gaze immediately finding the little bear nestled in the corner by the fire. It had grown noticeably stronger, its fur glossy and soft, and it now moved with confidence, exploring the cabin without the fear that had gripped it just days before. Just as Mara reached for her tea, a sharp knock echoed through the cabin. She froze, her pulse quickening. Visitors were rare in the remote village, especially in the dead of winter. The bear's ears twitched at the sound, and it looked at her wary but curious. Mara took a deep breath, steeling herself, and opened the door. Standing there was a man dressed in a forest ranger's uniform, a fur-lined hat shielding his ears from the cold. His boots crunched against the snow, and his eyes widened in surprise as he spotted the bear peeking from the doorway. "Good morning," he began cautiously, raising a gloved hand. "I hope I'm not disturbing you. My name is Elias, and I manage the wildlife in this area. I've received reports of a bear sighting near the village." Mara's stomach tightened. She had known this moment might come, but now, faced with an official authority, a mix of fear, guilt, and pride surged through her. "Yes," she said softly. I found it frozen near the forest edge. It was barely alive. I brought it inside to keep it warm." Elias stepped inside, his eyes scanning the cabin. When they fell upon the bear, still wrapped in blankets but moving confidently, his expression softened into a mixture of relief and concern. "You saved it," he said, almost reverently. "This bear is rare. Very rare. If you hadn't found it when you did, it wouldn't have survived the frost. But keeping it inside like this is risky. Bears are wild animals, and even young ones can be unpredictable." Mara nodded, her heart aching. "I know, I've been careful. It trusts me now. I couldn't leave it out there to die. Her voice wavered as the words escaped. I couldn't just walk away. Elias approached the bear slowly, crouching to meet its level. The bear sniffed him hesitant, but didn't flinch or retreat. Elias's expression softened. You've done something remarkable, he said. You've given it a chance. But now, it needs proper care to survive in the wild. The forest is harsh. And this bear, though strong now, will need a controlled environment to fully recover before it can be safely returned to its natural habitat. Mara felt a wave of conflict crash over her. She had grown attached to the bear, its timid nuzzles, the way it followed her from room to room, even its tiny, playful growls had become part of her life. The thought of letting it go tore at her chest. I don't want to give it up, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Elias smiled gently, understanding the weight of her emotions. I know, he said. It's not easy. But sometimes, the greatest acts of love are the ones that require letting go. You've given it warmth, safety, and trust. That's more than most could ever do. Now, it's time to help it survive in the wild. And one day, you may see it again, stronger and thriving. Mara sank into a chair, her gaze dropping to the bear, which nuzzled against her hand as if sensing the tension in the room. Her mind raced with memories of the past week. The night she had brought it inside, the long hours of feeding and tending, the gentle moments of play and laughter. Could she really let it go? And yet, she knew Elias was right, its survival depended on her courage to release it. Elias stood, offering his hand to Mara. We can do this slowly, he said. I'll help you prepare it for the transition, and I promise, you won't be alone in this. You've saved its life, and now we'll make sure it truly thrives. Mara exhaled, a mixture of relief and sorrow washing over her. She knew the coming days would be bittersweet, a blend of hope, love, and inevitable goodbye. But deep down, she also knew that the bond she had formed with the bear was unbreakable. No distance, no wilderness could ever erase the trust and compassion they had shared. As the snow outside glimmered in the morning light, Mara gently stroked the bear's fur, whispering softly, We'll make sure you're ready. I promise. The bear looked up at her with dark, intelligent eyes. And for a fleeting moment, it was as if they both understood the challenge ahead, and the enduring connection that would always tie their hearts together. The sun rose over the snow, covered forest like a golden promise, scattering long shadows across the glistening white landscape. The storm had passed, leaving the air crisp and still, with only the occasional whisper of wind through the trees. Mara's cabin was quiet that morning. A gentle calm settling over everything as if the world itself had paused to witness what was about to happen. Inside the little bear stretched, yawning and blinking sleepily. Its fur was now thick and healthy, glossy from the nourishment and warmth Mara had provided. It moved with a confidence that had only begun to emerge over the past week, its small paws padding softly across the cabin floor. Mara watched it with a bittersweet smile, her heart swelling with love and pride. Today she knew, was the day she would have to say goodbye. Elias, the forest ranger, arrived just as she had anticipated, carrying a small pack with supplies to help ease the bear's return to the wild. Are you ready? He asked gently, sensing the weight of her emotions. Mara took a deep breath, nodding slowly, her hand brushing the bear's soft fur one last time before she picked it up. They stepped outside, the snow crunching beneath their boots. The forest stretched endlessly before them, a vast, untouched world where the bear truly belonged. Mara's eyes scanned the familiar trees, knowing that once the bear disappeared into their shadows, it would be gone from her life. But not from her heart. With careful hands, Mara set the bear down at the forest edge. It paused, sniffing the crisp air, glancing back at her as if searching for reassurance. She knelt beside it, her face close to its small, intelligent eyes. It's time, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Go, be free, be strong and survive. The bear hesitated for a moment, nuzzling her hand one final time. Mara felt a lump form in her throat, a mix of sorrow and pride that made her chest ache. She wanted to scoop it up and never let it go, yet she knew that true love meant giving it the life it was born to live. Elias stepped forward, gesturing toward a safe path into the forest. The bear lifted its head, sniffed the air once more and then, almost in slow motion, it bounded into the trees, Its small body moved gracefully, each step stronger than the last, until it disappeared from sight, swallowed by the forest it had come from. Mara remained kneeling in the snow for several moments, letting the silence settle over her. Tears slid down her cheeks, but her lips curved into a soft smile. She felt an immense sense of fulfillment, knowing that her courage and compassion had given this tiny life a chance to thrive. The bond they shared could never be broken. It would live on in memory, in trust, in the quiet moments she would carry with her forever. Elias placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You did something remarkable," he said softly. "Not many people would risk so much to save a wild creature. You've given it a future, and it will always remember you in its own way." Mara nodded, wiping her tears. "I know," she whispered. "Lo, you gave it the greatest gift," Elias replied. "And that bond you've formed, that doesn't end here. It will live on, in the wild, every time it hunts, explores, or plays. You've changed its life, and it has changed yours." For a long moment, Mara stood at the edge of the forest, watching the snow glisten in the morning light. She could still feel the warmth of the bear's presence in her heart, the echo of its trust and gentle spirit. And though the forest now held it, free and wild, Mara knew that their story, this extraordinary, tender story of courage, empathy, and love, would stay with her forever. Finally, she turned back toward her cabin, stepping lightly through the snow. A gentle wind whispered through the trees, as if carrying a message from the little bear: gratitude, trust, and the unbreakable bond that had been formed between two souls from entirely different worlds. And Mara smiled, knowing that some acts of kindness leave a permanent mark, not just on others, but on the heart of the one who dares to care.